They say that a prisoner's last words are often their most honest. But what if the words come from a source far older and darker than any man could know? On death row, Thomas Hayes awaited his execution with only the cold walls of his cell for company. But the night before his fate was sealed, he began speaking in tongues, ancient, guttural phrases no one recognized. The guards shrugged it off as a last-minute breakdown, until the lights flickered and the entire block joined in. Tonight, we delve into a terrifying moment where one man's plea becomes a chorus of unholy power. Thomas Hayes sat in his cell, the faint hum of the prison's fluorescent lights his only companion. The rhythmic clinking of chains and distant murmurs of inmates filled the air, but none were as heavy as the weight of his upcoming execution. He'd been convicted of a crime so horrific that no one in the prison even dared speak his name. Tomorrow, he would face the needle, the end of a long life of bitterness and rage. But that night, something unusual stirred within him. Alone in the silence, his lips began to move, muttering words that felt alien to him. His voice, strained and raw, cracked as if drawn from some forgotten place deep inside his soul. At first, it seemed like the ramblings of a man losing his mind, but as the words grew louder and more insistent, something darker emerged. The language he spoke was not English nor any modern tongue. It was ancient, strange syllables twisting his throat into unfamiliar shapes. Outside his cell, the guards exchanged concerned glances. Another breakdown before the big day, one muttered. They dismissed it as the usual nervousness of a man about to die. But deep down, they could feel it too. An unease, strange energy in the air that shouldn't have been there. If you heard a man on death row suddenly speaking in an unknown language, would you investigate further or brush it off as just fear? The strange murmurs continued throughout the night, growing more intense with each passing hour. Guards passed by Thomas's cell every half hour, peering through the small window. Each time, they saw nothing more than him sitting on the cot, his head bent low, whispering words they couldn't understand. The flickering lights above cast eerie shadows that danced across his face. They thought little of it, until the flickering grew more erratic. It started with the light above his cell, then spread down the corridor, causing shadows to ripple along the walls. A chill ran through the prison as the faint, guttural words started to change, growing louder, more forceful. The air felt heavier, suffocating, as though something was pressing down on the building. It wasn't just Thomas anymore. One by one, the other inmates in the block began to chant, their voices rising in a disturbing harmony. The sound was a low, deep growl at first, but soon it escalated into an unsettling chorus, echoing through the halls like a chorus of lost souls. In the control room, the guards stared in disbelief at the security monitors. They saw not just Thomas, but every prisoner in the block, eyes wide, heads bent, chanting in unison. The words were the same as the ones Thomas had spoken, and the realization hit them like a hammer. This was no coincidence. Panic set in as the chanting reverberated through the prison. Guards scrambled to control the situation, rushing to the security room to assess the monitors. But the sight on the screens only deepened the terror. Thomas, standing at the center of his cell, was no longer alone in his strange trance. Every inmate on the block had joined him, their bodies moving in synchrony with the words they spoke, their eyes blank, as if something unseen was controlling them. The air in the prison had changed. It felt thick, as though the walls themselves were closing in. The temperature dropped sharply, and even the prison's fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting long, unnatural shadows. The chants grew louder, deeper, the syllables taking on a rhythmic quality, as if it were a ritual. But there was no one performing it, no priest, no leader, only the inmates, drawn together by an unseen force. "Get the warden," one of the guards shouted, his voice rising in panic. "This isn't right." But the warden had already heard. He arrived at the control room, his face pale. He watched the monitors in silence, his lips moving, as though he knew what was happening, but couldn't quite accept it. As the chanting reached a fever pitch, Thomas's voice broke through the chorus, louder than ever. The words were no longer unintelligible, they were now clear, a promise of something dark and powerful. Would you trust the word of someone who claimed a supernatural force was taking control of the prison? Or would you dismiss it as mass hysteria? The warden's expression hardened as he turned toward the other guards. "Prepare the lockdown," he ordered. But it was already too late. The prison's usual system of control had broken down, replaced by something far darker. The guards rushed to each cell, only to be met with blank stares from the prisoners, their chanting growing more intense. The lights above flickered violently, then suddenly went out, plunging the entire block into complete darkness. The sound of the chanting, however, did not stop. In the eerie silence, there was a soft, low whisper, a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "You cannot escape," it hissed, chilling the bones of anyone who heard it. The walls groaned, as though something unseen was trying to break through. The floor beneath their feet trembled with an unnatural force, as though the very foundations of the prison were shifting. In the control room, the warden and guards tried to re-establish communication with the outside world, but the phones were dead. The computers flickered before shutting down completely, as if the very machinery was refusing to work. Then the voice spoke again, clearer this time. "I have come for him." The lights blinked back on, and the chanting stopped. Silence fell over the block, but it was not the peace of resolution. It was the silence of something waiting, and all eyes turned to Thomas. The air in the prison was suffocating now. Every guard felt the pressure in their chest, a weight that seemed to come from the very walls, as if something was pressing in from all sides. The warden's gaze flicked to Thomas's cell. It was the only one now empty, the door wide open. Thomas was standing at the center of his cell, his face pale, eyes wide, staring into nothingness. His lips moved in unison with the words of the ancient chant that had echoed throughout the block. But now, it was different. The chant wasn't coming from the inmates anymore. It was coming from Thomas alone. He turned slowly toward the guards, his expression blank, but his eyes burning with an unnatural fire. "It has seen you," he whispered, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "It's here for all of you." Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted again, and a dark shadow appeared in the corner of the cell. The shape was massive, swirling, and formless, its presence filling the entire block with a sense of absolute terror. The guards backed away, unable to tear their eyes from the horrifying sight. As the shadow advanced toward Thomas, he fell to his knees, his arms raised in submission, and just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow surged forward, engulfing him completely. The room went silent once more, and the lights flickered once more, but Thomas was gone. The prison fell into chaos as the shadow dissipated, leaving behind an eerie calm. The prisoners sat motionless in their cells, their eyes vacant, but no longer chanting. The guards were frozen in place, unsure of what they had just witnessed. They glanced around the block, their minds struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The warden stepped forward, his hands shaking. His eyes widened as he noticed something. The mark on each of the inmates' chests, the same dark, hand-shaped burn that had appeared on Thomas. It wasn't a trick of the light, or a hallucination. It was real, a symbol that branded them all. The silence was broken by a final whisper, distant but powerful. "The reckoning has begun." The guards tried to contact the outside world again, but the lines were still dead. The doors were sealed. The building seemed to have become a tomb, a prison for something far more sinister than any human crime. The inmates were no longer the same. Their faces had changed, twisted in unnatural ways, their expressions hollow, as though they were no longer fully human. As the warden turned to flee, the doors slammed shut behind him, locking him inside with the very prisoners who had once been his charge. He realized too late that the curse had been cast on them all, and as the last lights flickered and died, the whispers began once more. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey into the unknown. Sometimes the deepest horrors lie in the places we least expect. If you were trapped in a prison haunted by something far more terrifying than human crime, would you face it head on, or turn away, hoping it would leave you be? Share your thoughts below. And if this tale left you questioning the boundaries between the living and the dead, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again at Dare to Listen for more supernatural stories that challenge the very limits of reality.